Lola, you're so welcome to the Half Year at Work podcast. I'm really excited for our conversation today. Would you like to introduce yourself to listeners, share a little bit about your background and how you got into doing what you're doing today?
Sure. Yes, so my name is Dr. Lola Gershfeld, and I'm an organizational psychologist and CEO of EmC Leaders. I am also a developer of the emotional connection process, or EMC, as we call it, that is based on the science of attachment, based on the science of emotional connection, helping teams to build more cohesive interactions, a more cohesive culture, and I think stronger relationships. All of that work has been inspired to me by my, I would say, um, I would say, struggle. It really has been inspired to me by my continued struggle of working as an HR manager or being a CFO or even a board member, seeing my board members struggle. And I remember this board meeting where I was like watching these board members throwing jabs at each other. And the chairman was sitting next to me, and I turned to him and I said, "Hey, like, why are they doing this?" And I remember I was like in my early 30s. I was the youngest one on the board. And he turned to me and he said, "I think it's because they care about each other." And I thought to myself, well, that's silly. That is silly. And I couldn't really understand what really that meant, but I found it very fascinating. And at that time, I already had 15 years of experience of building electronic manufacturing companies. My husband and we worked for 27 years together. So in that early stages, I started my career in when I was 19. So by that time, I already had the experience of building teams, building companies. So I felt very confident, and I was like fearless. I want to help people. I want to help boards.
Yeah.
I want to build a company. And I was kind of like grooving along. And then when I was asked to serve on this board, I said, like, sure, how hard can it be? I never served on a board, why not? And when I started my journey, my gosh, Ayofi, it was terrible. It was terrible. These board members wouldn't listen to me. They wouldn't take any of my advice. They didn't
Mm.
care about my wonderful insight that I had. They interrupted each other. They interrupted me. And I thought to myself, something is happening here.
Mm.
It's not just the about the strategy or about the agenda. There's something else is happening. And I was trying to kind of like teach them communication skills, and it felt like they would do it for a minute or two, but then as soon as they would stop, they would go back to their own way of blaming each other or withdrawing and shutting each other out. So and I remember yeah, I had that same similar situation when I was working as an HR manager. And I thought to myself, this is really about something else.
Mm.
This is not, I really have to get to the point of it. So I run to the bookstore. And you know how, as a young professional, you think every answer is in the bookstore? If you could just find the book, if you could just find the book,
Someone has obviously
life,
written a book about this
yes,
already.
yes. The answer to life is in the bookstore somewhere. So I remember coming back with like stacks of books on leadership and trust and emotional intelligence. And I was reading them. I loved like Good to Great. This was my favorite book, or Primal Leadership by Goldman, or Speed of Trust. All of these books were like on my desk, and I was reading them and bringing them to my meetings and trying to figure out what is happening here. But the problem is none of those things that I found in the books actually worked. So I started to outline patterns. Like I started to outline what is going on in our board meeting. We had 8-hour board meetings, and it would
Wow.
be like no progress. So I would run after the meetings, and I would like try to figure out who triggered whom and
Mm.
how we got off. And then slowly and surely, I started to see patterns. And at that time, I was already getting my doctorate degree in psychology. And my husband said, "Hey, do you want to go to this couples workshop?" And I said, "Okay." And the trainer was teaching us about attachment, about the couple's relationship, about emotions. And this process was called emotionally focused therapy, basically, emotionally focused approach to couples therapy.
Mm.
And as she was talking about how couples trigger each other and how one person start to demand and the other person start to shut down and not talk, I'm like looking and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is exactly what is happening in our boardroom. Oh my God, this is exactly
Yeah,
what's happening in our
I can
workplace.
imagine.
I was like, oh my gosh, work conflict is all about attachment.
Mm.
And I'm saying this out loud, and the person next to me said, like, "Oh, don't be silly. Adults are independent. They're
Mm.
self-sufficient. They don't need attachment." I said, "No, no, 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 no. You don't get it. This is attachment. This is exactly what John Bowlby talked about in all of his studies when he studied mothers and children and their
Yeah.
attachment relationship
Mm.
that he described.
Do you want
It's the
to
same. It's the same."
explain? Do you want to explain? So I know the different attachment styles. I'm familiar with attachment theory, but there could be some listeners today who are not really familiar with attachment theory. Do you want to explain a little bit more about what the different, or what, like, I suppose, how attachment theory evolved and the different attachment styles?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. It's such a profound, and I remember like studying attachment in my psychology master's degree, and I never could put together that it's the relationship. Attachment is basically
Mm.
relationship. How secure we are in the relationship is what makes us feel more safe with each other, makes our nervous system relax and feel free and play. That's what makes us, and it's all really starts with the brain structure. I think if we talk about attachment, we have to understand how our brain works. And Joseph Ledoux actually wrote a very nice book called The Emotional Brain, basically describing the brain structure and how our emotional part of the brain, the amygdala, has massive connection to all parts of the brain, including the prefrontal cortex. However, the prefrontal cortex does not have direct connection to the amygdala. What does it mean? What it means is that it's easy for our emotions to control our thoughts,
Mm.
but it is very hard for our thoughts to control our emotions. So, for example, I mean, for example, like if I'm stressed, like you probably heard about the fires in Maui, and my daughter lives in Maui, and she is very stressed and she is very scared of what's happening, and she has 5 children, so she is thinking like she's like, "Mom, I'm so stressed. I tell myself, okay, everything is gonna be okay, and I still feel my body is completely um, like fired up, always on the threat." Well, the same thing with our relationships. I mean, she has outside threat, fire, but this exactly what happens in our relationship in a workplace when we depend on each other. Our brain wants to be connected with the people we depend on.
Mm.
So when there's a disconnection happening, it is a threat. It is like a life and death situation. That's what attachment teaches us. That when we want to, when if we want our brain, our prefrontal cortex to be engaged, to be fully present, to be open to ideas and collaboration and engagement and creativity, we need our emotional brain to be calm. Otherwise, it hijacks the prefrontal cortex, and now everything becomes very difficult for us to do. So, in attachment, what we say is that when you have a secure connection, when you have a secure attachment with people, you are stronger as a person. You can be happy at work. you can play, you learn better because your prefrontal cortex is open. It's not hijacked. And when people have a disconnection in the workplace, like if I see my manager expressing disappointment or some sort of a rejection, or my coworker doesn't want to talk to me, I start to feel what we call a separation distress. My brain starts danger. It's dangerous. You are no longer is in a safe place. So what we notice is that when we feel this disconnection, what we do is we often go to protective behaviors. We start to either pursue the connection, which we go blame, criticize, judge, complain, lecture, our tone of voice goes up, our speed of speech goes fast. All of these are behaviors of a pursuer. We're pursuing the connection. We want that connection back. Or we go into withdrawer, which is avoidant, right? So we have anxious, which is a pursuer, or we have avoidant attachment style, which is we withdraw, we shut down, we kind of disengage, we avoid, we get busy. All of these things are withdrawers. It's not like they don't want to talk to us, but what they do is they preserve the connection. They don't want to say anything else that will create more disconnection. So that type of a mind shift, understanding that number one, we long for connection. We are wired for connection. We need connection for us to thrive. Number two is how we deal with this disconnection actually creates a negative cycle. And the negative cycle is, again, the most common one is one person says, why don't you respond to me? I've been sending you emails after emails. Why don't you talk to me? So they're pursuing the connection. And the other person says, oh my gosh, you are so difficult to work with. I don't want to talk to you. And they shut down and they withdraw. That's a withdrawal. So that cycle is called demand withdraw. One is demanding, the other one is withdrawing. So what we do in the emotional connection process, we help people, first of all, to de-escalate their negative pattern, to see what they're doing to trigger each other and how they get into stuck in this negative pattern and how to step out of this negative pattern. But then we teach them how to be accessible, responsive, and engaged, which is a key attachment question in the relationship is, are you there for me? Are you accessible to me emotionally? Are you responsive to me emotionally? Are you engaged with me? Even though you don't agree with me, are you still engaged with me? So ARE is a key defining moment. And how do we build that relationship? So if we are ARE to each other, we have a secure relationship. If we are in a negative cycle, we have insecure relationship. Sorry, it's been a long answer to
A long
the
explanation.
question.
But no, like I think it's really important to understand that. And one thing that I picked up on that I want to come back to, and you said it a number of minutes ago, but in all of the work that I've done around attachment theory, and that's kind of more from a personal side, understanding myself in the relationships that I have with other people as opposed to in a work context. So I'm really excited to kind of understand more in the work context, how it shows up and what it looks like. And I imagine it's probably the same as it does in our personal relationships as well. But Dr. Lola, one thing that you said was how secure we are in the relationship is what has the impact. And I suppose my understanding, the reason I kind of picked up on that is my understanding is you kind of have a default type, let's say. So you can either, and this all comes from childhood. So you have your secure type where you grew up in your needs were met as a child, essentially. Then you have as you described, the anxious, which is if your mother or your caregiver's love was withdrawn in some way, you made demands to get it back, and this is how you got love, essentially. And then the avoidant, where if your mother returns, you kind of ignore her because she's been absent, and that's how you respond to that. But I'm fascinated with this idea of it's also dependent on the nature of the relationship as well. It's not just simply I am naturally I have this natural tendency to be an avoidant person. So if someone's demanding something from me, then I'll withdraw and I won't respond to them. But I'm interested in the nuance of it depends on how the relationship is or how you feel about the relationship yourself. And if you feel secure, then maybe you're less likely to get triggered into an anxious or an avoidant response.
Absolutely. Aofi, you kind of like hit it on a nail on the head. This is exactly, we actually did a study recently with 169 participants, and we were measuring the relationship between anxious avoidant behaviors with workplace conflict, employee engagement, and turnover intentions, and everything shows in this direction, that the more anxious avoidant behaviors you display in the workplace, the more workplace conflicts you have.
Mm.
The more anxious avoidant, the less engagement you have. The more anxious avoidant, the more turnover intentions you have. So I think you're correct. All of these behaviors and styles have been developed with us, by us, through our caregivers in our childhood. However, they transfer into adulthood. So, for example, it actually travels with the relationship. Let's say you had a secure relationship with your parents, but when you go into your personal relationship or your work relationship, like specifically relationship between your manager
Mm.
or your direct supervisor, it's a key attachment relationship you have. So the manager may be very open and responsive and accessible to you. Now you are building that relationship security where those your attachment styles are not being triggered, and you're able to talk to them about it and easily. Now, if your manager does not recognize this and not open and accessible and responsive and engaged, now guess what? Your attachment styles all come up as a life and death situation, because
Mm.
your relationship depends on how successful you are in your job, how progressive you are, how developed, and how well you can thrive.
Mm.
So we recognize this, number one, and what we do is we teach people what we know now, which we have not learned before, is that attachment science provides us a map on how to restructure your interactions, where you start to create that more secure bond. Even though, let's say, the manager is more less accessible or less responsive, through the EMC process, they learn how to be emotionally attuned, how to be emotionally responsive to each other. So, for example, one of the things we teach is called bonding conversations. And in bonding conversations, we help people to share their emotions, their not only surface emotions, but softer emotions. We kind of like give them a list of emotions, like, so they can pick. And it's much easier for people to talk about the emotions when you have a list. We also talk to them about sharing their raw spots, so they become more aware what's triggering them in this conversation or in this relationship, or how we interact each other. So as they start to have this language of emotions, of raw spots and triggers, and also we give them a list of what's happening them in their thoughts, like automatic thoughts. So when they get triggered, what do they think?
Mm.
I have to get
Where do
away,
they go?
or
Where does their head go?
right, where
Yes.
did their head goes,
Yeah.
and what do they do in terms of the protective behavior? So we have a list. So everything, by just giving them this roadmap, they start to become more aware, like, oh my gosh, when I get triggered, I start to yell, and when I start to yell, I start to trigger the other person.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, when I get triggered, I shut down.
Mm.
And my shutting down is actually triggers the other person because I
Mm.
shut them out. So they start to see the pattern, and they can say it now. Oh, wow, we're getting stuck in a negative cycle.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, you are not listening to me. No, no, it's you who is not paying attention, right?
Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So
Oh,
now
brilliant.
we are fighting this. Now we're fighting the cycle. Now we're restructuring the cycle instead of we fighting each other. So
Yeah.
that creates a lot of safety. That's a
Yeah.
lot of safety in the
Yeah.
relationship
Brilliant.
right there.
I mean, I've had so many conversations on the podcast about emotions at work, and one that kind of sticks in my mind was with Ashley Collins, and one of the things that she said was we're basically all just triggering each other at work, our emotional wounds and things like that. They all come out in the workplace and they all get played out in the workplace. And I suppose bringing it back to be a bit more practical, if there's someone listening today, how can they best identify what's triggering them or how they're reacting to being triggered at work? And I loved the example that you shared there about the manager, because that's such an important relationship. We feel like our job depends on our manager, and if we have a really positive manager and a really positive manager relationship, I think it has a huge impact on our overall experience of work. But what if that's maybe less positive? And I'm kind of thinking, as you described, the manager who's not really that involved, who leaves you to your own devices, but equally a manager who's overly involved, who's maybe micromanaging you. Do you want to kind of talk about some of those as triggers and the responses that people can recognize in themselves?
I think that's a very, very important question, and I've been asked that question all the time, and I have to say, we have to go from the back. Like,
Mm.
what is the end in mind? Like Franklin Covey will say,
Oh,
"What's
yeah.
the end in mind?" Right?
Start with the end in mind. Yes.
We'll start with the end in mind. So the start with the end in mind. If we are paying attention to what do we want in our relationships,
Yeah.
in our work, we want connection. So that's very important. It's like, when pilots are flying their plane, it's like they know the plane works. They know how to get back to the place where they're going. The same thing, if we use attachment as our framework, we know every single time the human being needs connection. How do they get this connection? They need to feel valued. They need to feel important. They need to feel that the other person cares about them. They need to know that that their feelings matter. So when the manager is not accessible, responsive, and engaged, you have to be accessible, responsive, and engaged. You got to learn how to recognize the negative pattern, how to recognize what is triggering myself, like, and the
Mm.
things like you said, like, how do people know what triggers them? There are so many things: words people say,
Mm.
actions people do, facial expression, and the speed of speech, right? So people recognize the words. It could be complaining, blaming, or micromanaging. All of these things demonstrate that, oh my gosh, I'm in a negative cycle with my manager. Okay, now I know, wow, I'm in a negative cycle. So how do we trigger the cycle? Okay, so I hear the manager is lecturing me. Wow, I'm paying more attention. Wow, I'm sensing that something is happening with my body. I'm getting tense. That is a sign of a disconnection. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to slow it down. I'm going to take a breath. I see that the manager is lecturing me. I'm going to try to pay attention. What is happening with the manager? What's happened before they started to lecture? How did they get triggered? So I'm going to pay attention. Okay, they probably feeling stressed. Okay, they're lecturing me. They're probably feeling scared. Oh, they're lecturing me. They probably are scared of something is happening for them. Maybe they feel like not heard. So I'm going to slow it down. I'm going to really tune into their music, into their emotion, right? Interaction is a dance, and emotion is the music of the dance. So I'm going to really tune into that emotion. I'm going to give them reassurance that I hear them. I'm going to give them reassurance that everything is going to be okay. They're not alone. I'm with you. And I'm going to say it in this way so they can feel safe with me. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm tuning into their experience.
Mm.
That's very hard.
Yeah, I was about to say,
It's
easier
very
said
hard.
than done. And if someone is shouting at you, I think the last thing you want to do is tune in to how they're feeling. I think you're focused more on
Right.
the threat that's going on for you and how you feel. But I can see how easy it could be to get triggered by that response and then kind of either go into yourself if you're an avoidant type, or yell back if you are a bit more confrontational, if you're maybe that anxious type, that you're going to defend yourself to at all costs. But I, I guess it's understanding yourself and having that self-awareness of, I'm triggered, and that little pause in between to go, what's going on here? And I think
Right.
for people to understand that if something is happening in your body, if you're feeling tense, or if you feel like you need to retaliate in some way or withdraw out of the conversation in some way, then something's going on, and you need to just have that awareness and catch yourself. And maybe you won't get it right all the time, but with practice, you'll start to be able to recognize it more and more, I think.
I agree with you. It's practicing, it's being more aware, and it will come back again. The
Yes.
pattern will always come back. I say to people, if you don't change your pattern, the pattern will start to change you.
Yeah.
And you're asking question like, what makes people happy at work? The pattern makes people miserable. The
Mm,
negative pattern starts to change people. I
absolutely.
see it all the time, and it has changed me. I remember would come to work happy, and then boom, like I hit a wall, and we get into a negative cycle, and I'm
Yeah.
crying in the office.
Yeah.
I lock the door and I cry, and I can't get my thoughts, I can't do my work. I start to become more demanding. I start to become more bitter. And then people say, oh, it's so difficult to work with you. The only thing you do is you complain. Oh my gosh, that's not who I used to be.
Yeah.
So the negative cycle, oh, I shut down. You're so difficult to work with. You don't even respond to me. You don't care what we're doing here. Oh my God, that's not how this person was before.
Mm,
So if you can recognize that negative cycle is so horrible to company cultures, to team dynamics, to productivity, that's what you need to change. You
mm,
start to change the cycle by recognizing emotions, by tuning into your emotions, by tuning into the other person, and learning how to respond to these emotional
yeah.
negative cycles. Because I think one of the things that people really afraid of, Aofi, is that to work with emotion.
Yeah.
Emotion is the most powerful thing in the room, and it is almost the most powerful agent of change.
Yeah.
But in order for us to change emotion, we have to go into emotion. We can't ignore, like your friend Ashley Collins, right? She said that emotions are the most powerful thing. We need to learn how to work with emotions. And how do we work with emotions? We slow things down. We have
Mm,
the language for emotions. We make the emotions as granular. There's a researcher, her name is Lisa Feldman Barrett. She talks about granularity of emotion. She said that in order for you to organize your experience, you have to be as specific as possible with emotion. That means that when I do the, like, when people learn the process, they learn about not only just the language, what happens, like 3 levels of emotions, but what's happening in my body. Do I feel it in my chest because that's fear? Do I feel it in my neck because that's sadness? Do I feel it in my stomach? That's shame. What's going on with my body? How do I describe an image? If I would draw an image of what's happening for me in that moment, what would it be? A lot of people say, like for pursuers, they say, I'm all alone. I'm all alone on an island. Or I feel so desperate that this person doesn't respond to me. I completely lose it. I feel like I'm falling through space. That is becoming more and more granular with your emotional experience. When we do that, actually, what happens to our amygdala? It relaxes because it has a structure to it. It's like everything becomes more organized in your brain so you can relax. And then you talk about fears. There are 3 fears. What is your most fear about yourself? What's your worst fear about yourself in that moment? What is your worst fear about the other person in that moment? What is your worst fear about the relationship? Like a lot of people I hear, my worst fear in the moment is I'm a bad manager.
Mm,
I'm ineffective
mm,
as a manager. My worst fear about my people is that my people think that I am I don't care. When I shut down and I don't know how to talk to them, they just start to feel I don't care, but I do care.
mm,
But I just get overwhelmed. I don't know how to respond. And about my worst fear about my relationship is that we are becoming more and more distant. So as I take you through these stages of just recognizing emotions, I'm becoming more clear on the message. Oh, so I can say, the other day when we were in a meeting, I felt so small when you yelled at me. I felt so small. I felt like my whole body just sunk in. And now my worst fear is that I'm just not valued here as a member of a team. I'm just not valued member. And I start to feel like you don't see me as valued. And the other person says, "Oh my gosh, that's not what I meant. Oh my gosh, I had no idea. I don't want you to feel not valued. That's not my intention. That's not, I go up like this because I don't know how to get a response from you. So
mm.
I yell because in that moment I feel like I'm not being heard. You don't hear me. I'm completely alone. Do you see? Now you have a bonding conversation happening to people where they start to hear each other and they start to feel vulnerable with each other. And they can be ARE. They can be
Yeah.
accessible, responsive, and engaged with each other.
Yeah, yeah. And I think on the kind of the more general topic of emotions at work, we've always been told that the workplace is no place for emotions and we shouldn't show emotions at work. But like you said that, you had instances where you cried at work. I've had instances where I've cried. I'm not a typically a crier, don't cry in front of other people, but I have had those times because I was triggered so much. So I think
Mhm.
understanding ourselves that way and understanding that emotions are generally what rule us. So being able to identify and manage what those are is so important at work, and they do belong at work, and we need to have more conversations about them, I think.
I agree with you, Ayofi. I think the paradigm is changing.
Yeah,
The old
absolutely. Yeah.
paradigm is, especially with COVID, my gosh,
Mm,
it has triggered our human basic needs.
yeah.
And emotions cannot be, it's part of our system. It's like telling somebody, okay, when you come to work, you can't breathe, right?
Yeah.
You can't breathe. And emotion is
Hold your
our breath,
breath for
right?
eight hours
8 hours,
today.
right? Hold your breath, exactly. You can't drink, right? Emotion is part of us. We thrive of being emotionally engaged in our work. Being happy at work. Remember that book, Flow?
Yeah.
Flow, that he talks about how you get into the flow of things. Well, how are you doing that? You are emotionally engaged in the work. So we absolutely can't and we can't really reconnect with people when we don't talk about emotions.
Mm,
If I'm going to start convincing you what you did wrong and you're going to convince me what I did wrong, we're going to be at content level.
mm,
We are going to be in the negative cycle. We will never get out of the cycle. And that's another thing. People say to me, "Oh, we get off because of strategy. We have differences of because we can't agree on strategy or agenda." No, no. It's how you talk about the strategy and agenda
yeah.
that your attachment needs and fears all flare up. And then you start to be in a negative cycle, blaming, complaining, and shutting down. That's what happens. But when we slow things down, we can tune into our emotional fears and feelings and needs. We can reach out and say, I get so scared when that happens. I start to feel this way. And what I need to know is that you do care about me
Mm,
and I'm important to you and my feelings do matter. And the other person responds, oh my gosh, you are important to me. Your feelings do matter. And I'm right here with you.
yeah.
Now you have a bonding moment. And every time I say to them, what happens to you when you hear that? When you hear that you're important, that you valued, the person says, I feel so relieved. I feel so relieved that I am important. My gosh, we just got off because we of this uh, not knowing how to repair this disconnect.
Mm.
But I feel connected. I feel happy. I feel secure. I feel energized. And I said, what can you do when you feel all these emotions, happy emotions? Oh, we can do anything.
Yeah. And I think there's two sides to that. So to me, the amount of energy that is taken if we're in that negative cycle. So like you said, you shut yourself away in a room or you yell at people, the amount of emotional energy that's expended on those things that are going on, you're not getting your work done, you're not being productive. And then on the flip side, exactly like you said a couple of seconds ago, is that when we are feeling those like more positive, when we're feeling that sense of relief, when we're feeling secure, we can be more productive at work and we can kind of bring our whole selves to work essentially.
Absolutely, Effie. James Gross actually put a study saying that shutting your emotions down is very hard work,
Yeah.
and you can't do it for long. It's very, very exhausting. So what we do, we shut our emotions down when we feel disconnected. We shut, and then we blow up, right? And we blow
Yeah.
up, and then we shut back again. So, but when we are able to pay attention to the disconnects and repair those disconnects in the moment before they turn into the negative cycle, then we are happy at work, and we actually, in those bonding conversations, we produce oxytocin.
Yeah.
Oxytocin is a caring, loving hormone that reduces the level of cortisol in our body, which relaxes our amygdala, which is engages our prefrontal cortex, and everything becomes a lot easier for us to do.
Brilliant. My question is around, like, I'm thinking of people who maybe have been stuck in that type of negative cycle in work for a number of years. Or another example I'm thinking is someone who's been stuck in a negative cycle, changed jobs, and realized they're having that same pattern repeat again and again, which is the same, I think, in personal relationships as well, unless you identify and address the underlying issue around the pattern. So, any kind of suggestions for what people can do if they've been in that situation for a long time, if they've had those relationships for a long time, how do you introduce this type of new way of behaving with someone if you've been stuck like that for a while?
It's very hard. It's very hard because you have so many raw spots, so you get triggered yourself. But I think the best thing that happened to me is calling out the cycle, like recognizing it's not my fault. It's not the other
Mm.
person's fault. It's the negative cycle's fault. And just calling out, maybe not out loud, but even to yourself, like, oh my gosh, we're in a negative cycle. We're in a negative. I know it's not the other person's. The other person is not a bad guy. They
Mm.
want to be connected to me.
Yeah.
I want to be connected to them. I think that's kind of like you have to almost like train your brain to see the attachment relationship differently, right? You have to start to become more in tune to the steps in the dance that we do that triggers the negative cycle. So it takes a time. I mean,
Mm.
I'm not gonna lie to say like, oh my gosh, you take this course or you read this book, like you read my book,
Yeah, yeah,
and suddenly you become like this wonderkind,
yeah.
and then you can really. It takes time. It takes
Mm.
practice. It's a
Yeah.
lot of conscious, dedicated, committed work.
Mm.
Of look, I want to understand my relationship. I want to change the pattern. I don't want the pattern to change me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I just make a note of that.
Yeah. And that's I think that's the reason also why I created the tools in the EMC masterclass that we provide. It has like a list of raw spots, list of emotion. It has a reconnection form that gives you step by step. If you
Mm.
have to practice, like I've done over 900 of these cases with I always use the reconnection form, always.
Mm. Yeah. I think
Because it gives,
oftentimes, sorry, go on. Yeah.
yeah, because it gives me structure. If I
Mm.
don't use the reconnection form, I start to listen to people's stories, I get off. It's story after story after story after story,
And
right?
she
And
said
then
this,
we
and
end
he
up,
said that, and this is why it can never work. And yeah, yeah,
and then you take sides, right? Because you want to fix it.
yeah.
You
Mm.
want to fix it. But the problem without the reconnection form is you're fixing the wrong thing.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
need to
yeah,
fix the connection,
yeah,
not the story,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
you're not going to change someone else. You're not going to change their behavior. You're not going to change their story or their actions. But what you can change is your understanding or your interpretation of it. And as you said, solve for
and
the
the
negative
connection,
cycle and the connection
right?
and the connection.
And the
But
connection, because you start to be more comfortable with sharing emotions, and you
mm,
start to say, oh, we're in a negative cycle. I start to feel scared in that moment. You are important to me. I care about you. You see, I'm addressing attachment needs. You're important to me. I care about you. You're a very important member of this team. I get scared when you don't respond to me. I get scared. I start to feel alone. Now, you see, I'm already changing the message,
mm,
and the other person may not be ready to receive that, but that's okay. But
yeah,
that's okay. We understand that they're struggling. That's another thing that I say to people. People are struggling with disconnection. They don't know how to respond.
mm,
So we need to be, Brene Brown, she loves talking about empathy, right? Unrelenting empathy. Well, how are we going to have empathy if we don't understand that people are actually struggling for connection? So I think really important to start to see, oh, this person is blaming, complaining. Oh, they're struggling for connection. That's the cue. Oh,
yeah.
this person is shutting down. Oh, I know they're struggling for connection. That's the cue.
Okay,
So
yeah,
you
yeah,
have to constantly,
yeah,
constantly learn this and be in this. But I think that the reconnection form to me, I felt like it was my savior to
yeah,
any conversation. I would just grab it and like use it. And it would always get me back home to safety, which is
yeah,
connection. Always.
yes, yeah. Um, and I think, from everything that I'm hearing, what you're saying is that, and I think oftentimes what we want is we want a quick fix, don't we? So if someone wants to listen to the podcast today, go out and buy a book, or having listened to the podcast, now all of their relationships are fixed. It's like it's not that easy. Just because you know something, you have to constantly work at it. So being aware of it, being able to catch yourself in the moment, and having that language and identifying for yourself, this is a negative cycle, we're in a negative cycle. How do we come back to safety? How do we come back to connection? With the acknowledgement and the acceptance that the other person still may not respond, or they may not be ready to kind of reciprocate what it is that you need, but you need to kind of hold yourself so that you have that understanding that maybe they still won't meet you where you are, or kind of respond to the needs that you have. That's kind of how I would summarize what we've talked about today.
Absolutely. And again, once you start to changing yourself in terms of responding to the negative cycle and to understanding, you start to step out of those negative cycle. You are changing the dance.
Yeah.
You are changing the music,
Mm.
right? I love Argentine tango. I dance tango, and in the Argentine tango, if you watch amateurs with the professional, the difference is how they tune into each other, how
Mm.
they hold their emotional balance. So your job as a professional, as a person individually, is to learn how do you regain your emotional balance. How do you hold that there? Yeah, there's a negative cycle happening, and there's somebody is like throwing bullets at me. How am I going to recognize what they are actually doing is reaching for connection for me? What they're actually doing is saying, I'm so scared, I'm alone. I'm
Mm.
so scared, I can't find you. So that is a big shift. It's like going on the sideway and letting the bullets come just, by you instead of
Yeah.
hitting you.
Yeah.
So you are dancing every time you're interacting with somebody, you are dancing. You are
Mm.
dancing with them. And the music that is you are tuning into emotion is what's going to help you to change their dance. Is tuning into that emotional music.
Mm. I love that as an explanation. Is there anything that we haven't covered today that you want to get across?
Well, I think listeners to know is I know how difficult it is.
Mm.
It's so, so difficult. I went through that whole difficulty things in my work, but it's also I want people to know that there's hope.
Yeah.
You don't have to be stuck in whatever team relationship you are currently right now. Not that you have to move away and move to another job, but you can change your pattern. You can be the change maker by learning how to work with emotion. You don't have to be a therapist, you don't have to be a psychologist,
Mm.
but you can learn how to respond to emotions, how to articulate emotions, and you start to actually change not only your professional relationships, you start to change all of your relationships, your
Mm.
personal relationships, and everything around you becomes like a nurturing ground for you to evolve, to grow, to blossom. And I want just people to know that there is a roadmap you can learn. There is hope. You don't have to be stuck. You're not alone. We're right here with you,
Mm.
teaching you that roadmap and telling you that you can change the pattern so it doesn't change you.
Brilliant. I love that. So the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, what does being happier at work mean to you?
Being happier to me is having strong relationships.
Mm.
Strong relationships with your manager, strong relationship with people that you depend on at work, with your teammates, strong relationship with other teammates. The relationship is most important. Once you have the relationships, you can resolve anything. You can work on goals, you can work on teams, you can deal with whatever challenges you have. But the most important thing is that connected relationship, the secure relationship in your workplace. That's what makes people happy at work.
Brilliant. Love that. And if people want to reach out, if they want to connect with you, what's the best place that they can do that, or what's the best way they can do that?
Well, they can definitely reach out to me and connect with me on LinkedIn, Lola Gershfeld, right? But I have a company, emcleaders.com. They can get my book. It's on Amazon, two books, Emotional Connection and The Connected Culture. I just love the connected culture because it's full of artistic designs and easy ways of people how to reach for each other, how to respond to each other. We have the emotional connection course, EMC Masterclass, that they can look into, and you actually can become the certified EMC trainer, so you can integrate the EMC model into your culture at work. So I'm always here. You can email me, Lola at emcleaders.com, and I'm always here to help.
Brilliant. Love that. And I know you have a podcast of your own. Do you want to give a shout out to the
That's
podcast as
right.
well?
That's right. That's right. Thank you. I think The Leader in You. That's a podcast, and I talk about emotional connection and the skills and techniques. And I can talk about emotional connection, attachment, like I think all day long for hours and hours. So
And I
I'm
think we
always
could have
happy to
had this
share.
conversation. Well, it's gone on for longer than I anticipated, but I so enjoyed the conversation. And I think it's very practical in terms of what people can do when they're listening to the episode today. And also bearing in mind that it's not just about listening, it's about putting into action what it is that we've talked about. It's one thing to know these things, but it's going to take a while for things to change, and it's going to take practice. So for anyone listening today, there's no time like the present to start putting these things into practice. But I wanted to extend my thanks to you, Dr. Lola. I've absolutely thoroughly enjoyed this conversation today, and I look forward to more conversations in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it.